And welcome back to the Ultra Running Guys. You got Jeremy Reynolds and Jeff Winchester of the Ultra Running Guys. And the reason that we're here is to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey. And if this is your first time, welcome. If you're coming back, your family, you know we love you. But here's the deal. Part of taking your next step is knowing what you want to run, and that means knowing what you want to put on your calendar. So we've been doing race spotlights where we talk to incredible race directors, and we had somebody reach out. So Tyler, I'm going to give you a shout out. Tyler on Instagram is at CrimsonTyler88 that said, hey, I want to learn more about this race. And we've talked to some short races. Well, this is a long one. So we're going to talk to the RDs. They're going to give some great info, but Jeff, tell us what we're getting into.
Yeah, I'm super grateful for Tyler reaching out. This is exactly what we hope for, is that if you're listening and you're interested in hearing about a race because it may be something you've thought about, please send us an email, send us a message or something, and we will take a look at the race. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the Cowboy 200, and it is a point-to-point, right, one end to the other end, 200-mile foot race along the beautiful Cowboy Trail in Nebraska. It's a rails to trails course, which is important to hear, rails to trails course, and will be run on a non-technical, 100% runnable, which would be very difficult to run for 200 miles, crushed limestone path. Cool point about it is that there are no motor vehicles on the trail at all. There are going to be some short paved sections that you're going to have to cross when you're running through some of the towns. And the other thing to note is the 200 miler has a cutoff of 84 hours, which averages out to be about 25 minutes and 12 seconds per mile. And based on some of preliminary research, it looks like an incredible option for those runners looking to try their first venture into the 200-mile race distance. All right, so I've gabbed a little bit too long. And so without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to the race directors, Casey and Chase Hammond of the Cowboy 200. Casey and Chase, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Look, we're super excited, like we talked before. I mean, really the purpose of this, right, is we want you to get a chance to talk directly to people that are coming to run your race or thinking about running your race. And so we're going to talk about the tactical type stuff. What should they know? All that. But one of the things we really like to kick off with is obviously you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, I'm sure, into putting this thing together. What is your favorite thing about the Cowboy 200?
I think our favorite thing about it, at least my favorite thing, would probably be the uniqueness of the race. It is a 0 repetition 200 miler, like you kind of mentioned there. That kind of breaks the mold. It's not a mountain 0 repetition 200 miler. It's a rail trail. It's totally flat. It's in the Midwest. It's comparably super cheap compared to most 0 repetition 200 milers. It starts out about $500, and it runs through small town rural Nebraska, which is really cool to us because we grew up in small town rural Kansas. You know, the town that I'm from is about 200 people. So it's kind of cool to bring people to this part of the world that maybe they haven't experienced. Many of the local communities jump on board and get really excited about the race. Passes through 10 different little towns, and it's really cool to see all those communities kind of jump on board. And plus it ends in a brewery, and you can't beat that. So
what about you, Casey? Anything to add, or does that cover it?
I think that pretty well covers it. Just, it's got a really cool vibe.
Yep.
A really small, like a lot of the people that run are like, wow, I just can't believe how nice everybody is that I see. Like last year we had a local lady that lives along the trail. She just put out like a cooler of cookies and water because she heard the event was going on. So it's just like they just want to be a part of it, and like the local communities just love it. They think it's great. They don't understand it at all, but they think it's great.
That's kind of cool.
Running's not quite as well known in this area. So a lot of people they didn't even realize that running 200 miles was possible. So everyone wants to get a piece of it. Everyone wants to come out and see the runners run by in town. It just makes for a really cool vibe.
That's awesome. And that may be a good opportunity to kind of reach out to some of those people who live around the course and everything. Say, hey, we got a 200 miler taking place. There could be people running down this trail. Put out some more water and cookies because they loved them last time.
They did.
Yeah, I mean, that is really cool. So Chase, you mentioned something as you were going through that, and I don't want to gloss over too quickly, but you mentioned that the price is affordable. And so comparatively to others, it does appear that this race is significantly cheaper than what you may experience from a point to point type race. And you said it starts off around $500 for an entry. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's correct.
That's cheap for a 200 miler.
Yeah, for everybody listening, I mean, I think that that's just a really good point, right? Especially if you're thinking about it, and it doesn't take away from any other races at all. But you can imagine some of the other ones are through pretty remote areas. I'm sure that the time and money and everything that it takes to set that up. But you guys have managed to 200-mile trail essentially on the rails to trail, and so you've got a video. We'll post all the links. But there's a video you can go see the course, and it's got these aerial shots. And we were talking about it, like, one, it's like beautiful, and you got these incredible bridges and everything. And then I was like, man, that is a long straight road, right?
It's Nebraska.
Parallels next to the road. So on that note, though, I mean, we just kind of touched on it, but what should somebody expect from the course? The course. We know it's pretty flat. He mentioned kind of the crushed limestone, bridges. But is there anything else you want people to know about what they're going to see or experience as they go along this trail?
Another cool thing with it being a rail trail, there's a lot of history with the old railroad along the trail. And we try to utilize certain points along the trail, historic points as aid stations. Like one of them, there's the aid station at an old grist mill, and then we've got an aid station at an old train depot. Another aid station in Long Pine is a bunkhouse that people working on the railroad used to bunk at. So that, and then the fact that it's super flat, you can just see forever too. I mean, just miles.
Good and bad.
It's just
right.
Place, it kind of can get in your head a little bit because it seems like you're going nowhere. The terrain doesn't change. You can see forever. And obviously a long distance between aid stations. So it can just seem like the miles drag a little bit, in my opinion.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So you said there's a long distance between aid stations. According to your website, there's 10 aid stations, and there's also 9 non-manned aid stations. So what's the average distance between aid stations?
The average distance between manned aid stations is a little over 17.25 miles.
Okay.
If you count in all of the unmanned water stations, it takes it down to 10 miles.
And so are the unmanned water just water?
Yep.
Just water.
Okay. So how do you recommend, I'm sure you guys have a guide in that, but if somebody's hearing about this for the first time, like how do you recommend that people plan and also just kind of give an overview for the manned aid stations? What kind of things do you offer? What can they expect?
All manned aid stations have water, electrolyte beverage, grab and go food. Starting in Neely, which is our 3rd manned aid station, there will be hot food for all of the runners. We have a kind of a rotating menu as they go down, so it's not repetitive. Coffee, juice, pretty much your standard ultra aid station fare.
Yep.
At all manned aid stations. And all of our drinks are ice cold. So we put ice on everything. So that's always nice because it can be hot.
Sometimes we ask about, cupless race, that kind of thing. I would imagine in this, right? 17 miles in between aid stations when you talk about calories and things like that. So, if you're listening, I think that that's just a good planning note, right? Plan to carry because 17 miles, if you're not feeling great, can take a while, right? So you want to plan to.
But that's pretty typical in a 200-mile race,
right?
That kind of distance between aid stations and 2. And so I don't want anybody listening thinking, God, that's a really long way between aid stations. That's kind of typical in a 200-mile race, just because of the overall distance of the race and to be able to service that the distance and the runners, particularly in a point to point. Now, it's the challenge for point to point for sure.
So, and we like that aspect of 200s too. I've always really enjoyed that about 200s, the really long sections between aid, and you're really self-reliant for a long period of time. So a lot of people have asked us, why don't you shorten that up? And we're like, because we like it.
It's part of it.
You have to deal with it.
It's part of the experience.
It's part of what you're planning for. The other thing that is very common in 200s, and I know that you guys have as well on your race, is sleep stations. So tell us about that. How many sleep stations do you have, and what can I expect when I show up at one?
We've got 3 sleep stations. 2 of them are indoor. One of them is an outdoor sleep station just because it's in such a remote part of the trail. Like the further west you get, the more remote it gets until you hit Valentine. The first sleep station is in Atkinson, which is around the 100-mile mark. It's at the community center. So we've got cots set up for the runners in a separate room. The second one is going to be at Long Pine. And that is the bunkhouse that we were talking about that has 2 beds in a room. The two rooms share a bathroom with a shower. So a lot of the runners call that the Ritz of aid stations because you can get an actual shower, a hot shower, before you go back out. And that's at around 150 miles.
And there's 10 rooms.
And there's 10
bunkhouse.
rooms.
So
Yeah,
most of the time, everyone has their own room
Mhm.
and a hot shower. And we're serving hot
Yeah.
food there. It's
Yeah.
a really cool place.
The bunkhouse provides soap and towels for all the runners, and they wash the blankets between everybody coming through. So they take really good care of us there. And then the last aid station that has a sleep station is Wood Lake.
Yep.
And that's about a marathon from the end.
And that would be the longest stretch until the end, as well as after Wood Lake, our last sleep station. It's a marathon between
Mandate
anything.
stations.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
We do set up like a tote that has grab and go food in it, like prepackaged cookies, crackers, things like that at Arabia. That's about close-ish to the halfway between Wood Lake and Valentine for runners. So they can get calories at that aid station.
So how many people drop at the Ritz because they just
That's what I
shower?
was
They're
about to
like,
ask
you
the
know
same
what?
thing.
Yeah.
None.
Nobody
Really?
has ever dropped at the Ritz.
No.
That's
They
fascinating.
are rejuvenated after that.
Yeah.
I'm like,
We
don't
have
wake me
some-
up. I just took a
Right.
shower. I'm done.
We have some really good volunteers at that aid station that they'll have fun with you, but they're also going to kick you out and make you get back out there.
Experienced ultra runners.
Experienced ultra runners. It'll let you relax for a second, but they're not going to let you get too comfy.
Yep.
I've never thought about this question until just now, and I'm just going to ask it. So how long, and if I'm doing a 200 miler, I've thought about doing them before anyway. And I've talked about these sleep stations. I've heard about them when we've had them on, talked to other guests who've run these races as well. How long is there a length of time that I'm allowed to stay in a cot?
So at Cowboy 200, we've never had any limit. But I know a lot of them. So I think Destination Trail, and I don't want to say this wrong, but I think it's 6 hours. I think is what they do for like the Triple Crown races. And then some races I've also heard of, basically, if all the cots are full, then they'll kick the person out who's been in there the longest.
First.
So
You should just have your volunteers dump the cot at like 2.5 hours.
Right.
Time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Don't do
so
that.
on that note, one of the things that's interesting. So this is, again, it's a flat, I'm assuming mostly straight course, right? So 84 hours. I have that right? 84 hours to
Yep.
cut off.
Correct.
When I first saw that, I was like, okay, so a lot of 200s have significantly longer. And I thought, but this is a different type of race. And so let me ask this: in terms of people that drop, and we can talk about kind of the DNF rate and that kind of thing in a second. But are you seeing people time out, or is that not really an issue?
Most of the time, it's not because of timing out. It's just because they quit or have like overuse injuries. We have had a few timeouts.
We've had only a few timeouts
Yeah.
total between the years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult it will be because they think flat. And yes, it is faster for sure. You can compare people who've done the mountain 200s and compare their times to the Cowboy, and Cowboy's way faster, of course. But they believe because it's super flat that it will be significantly easier. And I think the general consensus is from the people who've DNF'd is that running 200 miles on a flat surface also comes with a lot of challenges, just because you're utilizing the same muscle groups for the entire race. Your damage and fatigue is no longer spread out through your legs, like it is if you're going up and then down. And there are still really long sections without aid. So.
Yeah, we've talked several times. So we live on Pancake Flat, and anybody who's been listening to several of our episodes will be like, here we go again, right?
They're whining again.
We live on Pancake Flat, and so we've talked a lot about doing walk run intervals, those types of
Mhm.
different things, and really how difficult. And I've found even here, just the local marathon, you got people that come in from Charlotte and areas where it's not even mountainous or anything. And they'll go, wow, that was a much harder marathon or something than I was expecting just because it was so flat.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
if you're listening and you haven't heard that before, just recognize that
Yes.
practice that if you can. Really look into, we've done episodes on run walk intervals, those types of things. I would imagine that'd be incredibly helpful in this type because there are no natural walking areas,
Right.
right? There's nothing that
The
says
only ones that there are, we do have a couple course reroutes because a few years ago, the Niobrara River flooded, took out a bunch of bridges, and Game and Parks just hasn't had the funding to fix some of those yet. So we do reroute onto some dirt roads, and those are where you're going to see any elevation change. But a lot of the time, the runners are like, "Oh, that feels so good." So
yeah,
but
probably, yeah. They're like, ooh, I haven't used that muscle in 14
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah.
yeah,
In terms of, is there required gear? So this race takes place in September. You already said it can get kind of warm, but what are the nights like? Is there anything that runners need to know about in terms of required gear or, safety items, things like that?
we do have required gear. Off the top of my head, I don't remember all of it. I know there's a water carrying capacity. They have to carry warmer layers, an insulation layer, basically, because nights can get cold out there. The wind's probably going to blow, and that'll make it cooler as well. So we do have that.
Yeah. The first year of this race, it was in November and it was brutally cold.
Yeah.
Now it's in September. I think most people are relieved about that.
Mhm.
Days are typically fairly warm, but you just never know in Nebraska. I mean, it could be anything. But I think last year it was low 80s
Yeah,
during the day, and then at night it got really nice and
50s.
50s, maybe even low 60s. That's about average. The wind will typically blow really hard at least one day. Our first year when it was cold, it blew over 50 miles per hour one day.
Headwind. Yeah.
Headwind. It was brutal. Last year it didn't blow very much, but
No, it rained the first morning, so everybody was wet and their feet were wet that first morning.
Mhm.
And then the sun shone the rest of the race pretty well. Bring sunscreen for your aids, for your drop bags and stuff, because we saw a lot of roasted people out there that didn't have enough sunscreen, or like
We have
a
it at
sun
aid
hat. We
stations.
have it as aid stations, but
Mm.
if you're out there for a long time, you might need to reapply.
Yeah. The required gear, by far the heaviest thing for your required gear is going to be the amount of water you have to carry, because there's such a long ways between aids and it's going to be warm. So other than that, required gear is pretty simple stuff for this race.
So you mentioned about the amount of water you have to carry. Now, is that up to the runner to decide how much to carry, or do you have a minimum requirement?
Yeah.
So I believe our minimum requirement now is 2-liter capacity. So
Okay.
they have to have the ability to
Mhm.
carry 2 liters.
That's fair.
And I'd have to check our runner's manual to make sure that's correct. I think Casey's checking right now. It's either 2 or 2.5 liters.
I think the point, though, I mean, and the runners will get that information, but just being able to plan that, right? Hey,
Yes.
obviously it's ways in between. There's going to be a requirement. So there's going to be some gear required. Obviously, most people that are at the point where they're ready to take on a 200, that's not going to be something new.
Exactly.
They're expecting that,
But
they're expecting
Yes.
required gear.
right,
Mhm.
right. But, still a good talking point. So one thing you mentioned was drop bags. So talk to us about, I would imagine that this would be a great race in terms of being able to crew or support or something like that, just because, again, when you see the pictures, it looks so accessible. But talk to us about that. Do you encourage it? What are limitations for the crew? How many drop bags can you have? Those types of items.
So crew can go to every single mandate station, and drop bags are allowed at every single mandate station. So it's super duper accessible. And like you said, it's basically right down the highway. The trail runs parallel to the highway most of the time. No crew is allowed at unmanned aid stations.
Okay.
That's basically our only rule regarding crew. But like you said, it doesn't get any more accessible. Basically, drive down the highway. Every aid station is in a town. So when you get to that town, jump into the aid station. It is rural Nebraska, and most of the towns that you go through are pretty small. So there's not like an abundance of services for crew. necessarily. Like if people
There's
are
not a
looking
lot.
for 24/7 gas stations, 24/7 places to get snacks, they're few and far between. Basically the Start in Norfolk, and then I think O'Neill has one,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is about 80 miles in.
Mhm.
And then I think maybe Valentine at that point, which is the end.
Probably there might be.
Ainsworth might have something, but a couple places between the start and finish might have a 24/7 store. If you want to get something to eat, you're probably not going to get much after, 7 or 8 at night. So
It's a valuable
Yeah,
piece of information.
That is, so it's very important. And
Yep.
I'm going to just sit on it just for a second. And what you're saying that I want listeners to pick up on is if they're planning on running this race and they're bringing a crew with them, their crew needs to come up with a plan. Need to have a plan on how they're going to fuel themselves, fuel their car, fuel everything about themselves, regardless of their runner. I hate to say that, but regardless of their runner, in order to best support their runner, they need to be supported themselves. And the resources available for them are not going to be abundant 24/7. And so understanding what the different towns look like is something that I would, if I have a run, if I'm the runner, I would ask my crew captain to do some research to say, take a look at this, reach out to the race directors if need be to learn a little bit more about these destinations and about what's taking place in these towns, because you need to be prepared for the lack of personal resources that you may need.
Mhm.
Well,
It's just awareness.
And me as a runner, the last thing that I want, especially because I usually have my wife crew, the last thing I want is to be out there thinking, well, she hasn't been able to eat for this long, or, I'm worried
Yeah.
about, because that kind of stuff happens. And
That's right.
there are parts in every race where we look for the reason to,
Yeah.
make a decision, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
so plan ahead, make sure that there's a plan. So that way the runner doesn't have to worry about the crew can be taken care of. I think that's a great bit of information.
My
That
crew
being
is
said,
starving.
the communities do want the business, so we
Okay.
definitely encourage crew to hit up those restaurants along the towns when they're open, but just
Yeah.
overnight, there's nothing 24/7 for
Mhm.
food.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you saying that too, because I think the way I just described it almost sounded like they were destitute and deserted towns, right? Because they're not. I mean, they're towns. They have things
Right,
going on.
yeah.
They're just not open up at 1 a.m. For you to
Right.
get something to eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's thank you for the clarity on that. I think that's important. Registering for this race. What does the registration look like? Do I have to have run any kind of qualifying events or anything to participate in the 200-mile with you guys?
We don't have any prereqs for this race. We'll let anybody do it. We think it's a pretty safe 200 for someone to attempt. Like Chase said earlier, a lot of it is along the highway. We do have GPS trackers that all of the runners are required to wear, so we know where you're at, we know where they're at. There's really good cell coverage, so if you run into an issue, you can get a hold of people. We have an emergency contact that we put on the back of the bibs should they run into any issues. And should they run into issues, they're sometimes 100 yards from the highway. So it's pretty safe. So we don't have any prereqs for this race.
Great to know. And do you have a max capacity, or is there a risk of selling out?
The max is 150, and that's between the 200 and the 100. So there is a 100-mile race as well. But so it's split between those. It's not 75, it's just 150 between both of those.
It's never sold out yet,
Okay.
but it's getting closer every year.
Mhm.
I think right now
We're around
between both races,
we're
what
in
do
the
we
nine,
have?
I think we're in the
We're in
90s.
the 90s right now, I think,
Okay. And
which is
yeah,
by far the most we've ever had at this point.
I would say early May, there's still a lot of time,
Mhm.
for those registrations to roll in. So if you're interested, go check it out, do the research and pay attention to that. One thing you just mentioned, and we were talking about before. So you have a 100-miler as well. The
Mhm.
interesting thing about the 100-milers, it doesn't start at the same time or place.
Mhm.
And so that we talked about this a point to point. Tell me if I'm wrong. It starts at the midpoint of the
Mhm.
trail and it's 26 and a half hours later. So the 200-miler starts on Friday.
Mhm.
Saturday morning, you have 100-milers, which means if you're listening, here's what I would recommend. Try to time it so you show up at about, 26, 25, you watch 100 fresh runners just run away from you and you get to watch them for miles and miles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or-
It makes the logistics from a race directing perspective a little interesting because you have the slower moving 200 milers, and then you have the faster moving 100 milers. So it makes that second half aid station timing is interesting.
Mhm.
I say if you're running the 200 miler, just enjoy passing some of the 100 milers that may be struggling.
Yeah.
And celebrate. Say, look here, dude, why are you whining? I've already run 100
Right?
more
Yeah,
miles than
exactly.
you.
Yeah.
You think that's going to happen, huh?
It could happen.
What are you doing? I just ran
Not for me.
110 miles.
You're over there whining about a blister. Have you seen my feet?
Well, and here for you competitive types, one other thing I do want to mention that you have on your website. So there is a cash prize for first place male, first place female for the 200. It's a $1,500 cash prize, so it's not insignificant. And you guys are also offering $500 bonus for a course record.
That's right.
Male and female. Yep.
And so just for the record off the site, the current male course record is pretty impressive. Sub 48, 47 hours, 50 minutes, and 38 seconds. And I did notice the gentleman that ran that was logged in at 57, smoked everybody else. So no excuses.
He's a beast.
He's an animal.
And then the female course record is 52 hours, 46 minutes, and 8 seconds. So if you're like, well, I think I can do that on a nice flat 200-mile course, you could get a payday from it. So keep that in mind.
That's right.
Yeah, basically it'll definitely cover your race entry and then some.
Yeah,
So
cover 3 times your race entry for this.
I'm going to ignore the fact that you said that the person who has a course record is 57 years old because it makes me feel really pathetic.
It tells me that you should be winning races.
Good point. Good point. I am going to not.
That's
win
right.
that race.
It means there's still time, man.
There's still time.
I got 5 years to get better.
That's right.
So
go ahead.
No, did you have?
I'm looking through my notes real quick to see if there's anything else I want to touch back on. No.
We've talked about a lot of great kind of logistical stuff. I think that if people are plugging in, they're going to get the value from that. They're going to come prepared. Obviously, you guys seem so approachable. You talked about a Facebook group, and there's a lot of support in there. So if somebody's thinking about it, get plugged in. But I want to know, and this isn't obviously a logistical question. We asked you at the beginning, kind of what's your favorite part? But we want to know as the race directors, like, what does it mean to you guys to have people come out and invest their time and their trust and run this race?
It means everything. This ultra running has become our entire life. It's our job, it's our passion, it's what we do. Every race that we have, our family grows. We make more friends. We talk to people all the time who we've met at races now, and they're just like family to us. So we just really enjoy that, and that's why we do what we do. We are at the finish line, Chase or I, for every single runner, to give them their buckle, tell them good job, chat with them. And we just think that's really important.
Yep. Yeah, basically exactly what Casey said. We wouldn't have any friends if it wasn't for ultra running. So, I mean,
feel that, I mean, we're huge on community. It's the reason we do what we do. And so it's not surprising, but it's always so cool to talk to other people who, I mean, that's what they live for. And it's clearly you guys.
Sounds the ultra running community is the best community there is. I say it all the time. You know? And that's one thing we do. We try to always keep our caps fairly small for our races because we just want to have a chance to get to know our runners just a little bit as they go through the journey. It's cool when they cross the finish line saying, oh, that's Tim or that's Gibson coming right now, rather than that's Bib 326, Right. So
that's fantastic. Listen, I mean, there are 200s that are popping up all over the place. It's becoming the new distance for a lot of ultra runners.
New 100.
Yeah, it's the new 100, if you will. And to have an option like this for those that may be intimidated to run a mountain course, to try something like that, I think it's a great option to be out there for runners to be a part of. And I think we're going to continue to see the 200-mile distance explode. With more and more people venturing into it. I know it's super difficult for race directors to manage and to logistically organize for that length of time. It's a huge commitment. So thank you for being a race director that takes on that burden for the runners who want to do it. It's definitely appreciated.
We love it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We love the 200. So
we do.
Yeah.
And so just kind of recap again, if you're listening and you're interested, you've got a beautiful, fast course. It is a very affordable race. And it's a great time of year in September. You've obviously got great support, great race directors. So if it sounds like something you're seeing, go check it out. Again, we'll post the links. Our motto is just show up. So just show up, especially if you've been thinking about it. And really for everybody plugging in, we do, if you're not plugged into the regular podcast, please go check that out. Like I said, we're about community, sharing stories, talking with race directors. So we appreciate you so much. And to the Ultra Running Guys family, you know how much we love you. But Chase and Casey, just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. It was awesome. Appreciate it.
We'll keep around for just a second to say bye, but for everybody else, we'll talk soon. Cut.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out our full lineup of podcast episodes that are designed to help you take your next step in your ultra running journey.
So be sure to check the links below, and you can visit our website at theultrarunningguys.com or download your episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, when in doubt, just show up.
See ya.